Welcome to the bonus show. Let's start today with a deeper dive into the 538 election projection model. So let me set this up. Many of you may recall that as a guidepost on June 27th, before the presidential debate, the 538 election forecast had this as a 50-50 race. Now, that's not each candidate is polling 50%. Their model is just how likely is it that in 100 simulations with today's polling data, either candidate wins. And what they found was with an element of distribution, with 100 simulations, Trump came out the victor, 270 electoral votes, 50% of the time. Biden came out the victor 50% of the time. Since then, excuse me, even though we've seen polling shift a little bit, general election polling went from Trump plus 1.5 to Trump plus 3.3. Some swing states have tightened. Some swing states like Pennsylvania have moved more in the direction of Trump. We look at the model today and it's 51-49 Trump. How is it possible that with all this motion, nothing has changed? And there's an explanation for this, and it's a number of different elements. One is what is going on with the underlying polls and how accurate will they be on election day. One of the things that the model does is it looks at how much error has there been in the polling in previous years, how correlated was it state to state. And it points out that if you have an overestimation in Wisconsin, for example, how does that relate to the overestimation in the average state? And what does that do overall to the electoral vote if the popular vote is different? And this is one of the real difficulties of making predictions when it comes down to under 500,000 votes or even under 250,000 votes in 3 to 5 states, Pat, which is that if you take one state and you say it's polling 2 points off from 2020, you can say, all right, well, how does that alone change the electoral results? But the more important question, the tougher question is, how would Biden doing 2 points better in Wisconsin change all of the other states in which the margin was under 2 points? There isn't a definitive answer. But the point here is, with regard to the model, you have to make so many adjustments, caveats, and predictions on this basis that it doesn't really swing the predictive value of the overall model very much.
Well, I've also noticed that the post-debate polls, while they've shown a slight downtick for Biden, they haven't been too disastrous in some of the swing states that he needs, namely in Wisconsin and Michigan. I saw some recent polls showing that he's winning there. If he's able to win those states, plus Pennsylvania, that's all he needs. He can just pick up the rest of the blue states that you would expect to win, and then he's going to be able to secure the 270 electoral votes needed for the presidency. So that scenario there, I think, probably makes up a lot of the prediction models to show that he does have a decent chance at winning this thing, essentially 50-50. And also there is a lot of uncertainty at this point because we're still 4 months out from the election, and 4 months is an eternity in American politics. As people like Rachel Bidikofer tell us, people don't even start to really focus on the race until Labor Day. So that's all a more optimistic view for Biden that suggests maybe he should stay in the race. However, if we take a look at the debate and sort of the underlying concerns that have been raised from that debate, it suggests that it's not going to just be unique to that one single debate. It suggests that maybe he'll have issues with communication from here until the election. And if we have more of these gaps, if we have another debate where he doesn't perform well, I think that these concerns will start to grow. And as we get closer to election day, it's going to be more set in stone, the fact that Biden's going to be trailing and maybe unable to overcome Trump.
The other aspect of not uncertainty, but limited predictive value with regard to some of these models is that they're also making an estimate of how closely does polling today typically reflect what is the situation on election day. And part of that goes to what Pat is pointing out, which is how much of the future performance of Biden is already baked in, which would reduce volatility, versus how much have polls swung in the past. What the model finds is that although it's a relatively small, the sample size isn't huge because there haven't been that many presidential elections in American history. It's not the big, it's not like we have hundreds and hundreds or even 1,000 from which to make projections. But one of the elements of it is that polls can move about 8 points from this point until election day. That has become a smaller number over the last 20 years. That's going all the way back to 1948. But it is also true that it makes it hard to make definitive projections when historically you can have an 8-point swing between early July and election day. And so listen, that's why we're at this kind of 50-50 stalemate.
Yeah, and my sense that the numbers won't get 8 points worse for Biden than they currently are, but maybe he could recover somewhat. The concern from some folks about that potential comeback is that maybe Biden's not the guy to do it because he already wasn't doing too many media appearances. And so now if he just starts doing a whole bunch of them, that could help him potentially, but maybe it won't be enough.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely a concern. When it comes to all of these different indicators, right? The polling in the swing states, the national polling, the forecasts, Alan Lichtman's 13 keys to the White House, all these different things. What to you stands out as maybe the most important or influences your decision about whether to call for Biden to step down or stay in the race or stay neutral in this?
Honestly, I understand that the general election polling can be seen as a proxy in general to enthusiasm. But I'm really kind of looking at those swing states. And I understand that, listen, if there's a 2-point swing nationally away from Biden, states that he won by 1, you might say, well, now he loses by 1. But I don't know that it's quite so simple. And so, listen, if Biden wins California by 4 fewer points than he won it in 2020, could it be a sign about what happens in the rest of the country? It could. But it doesn't really matter. Biden's getting those California electoral votes. So like a very specific sign of trouble for me is a poll that says Trump's up 7 in Pennsylvania. If Trump really wins Pennsylvania by 7, it's hard for me to imagine that Biden's going to win every other swing state. Now, that's not the only poll out of Pennsylvania, right? We would be looking at an average of polls in Pennsylvania. But I find myself looking particularly closely at swing state polls and specifically the shift in swing state polls since the debate.
Yeah, I think swing states are the polls to look at because the national polls can be a bit misleading. You may see Biden and Trump tied, but Biden actually probably has to win the national popular vote by like 4 or 5 percentage points to be able to ensure that he's going to essentially win the Electoral College. He won the popular vote in 2020. 51.3% to 46.8%. That's pretty clear. Like that's a pretty good margin of victory, about 4 points or so. Yet he only won the Electoral College because of the fewer than 100,000 votes across a few swing states. So,
or 112,000, I think it was.
Yeah. So if we go into this thing and the national polls look like it's a head-to-head matchup, you actually have to interpret that as Biden being the underdog, actually being behind, because it's not the national vote the popular vote that determines this thing. It's the Electoral College.
That reminds me of something I realized during the podcast I wanted to ask you. It's been a long time since a Republican presidential candidate won the popular vote in a presidential election in the United States. Right now, Trump is supposedly leading the popular vote by 3.3. Do you believe that Trump could actually win the popular vote this time around? Or is Biden almost certain to continue winning the popular vote as Democrats do, but then it's a question only of the Electoral College?
I think Trump could win the popular vote. I mean, it's been 20 years, right, since a Republican won the popular vote, Bush versus Kerry, but it could happen again. I don't see why not, especially when you look at the two candidates' approval ratings. Both are in the gutter, but Trump is polling slightly higher. I think it's like 41% to 37%. And with a lot of these polls showing it even or maybe Trump up by a little bit, I don't think we can take for granted this idea that Democrats will always win the popular vote. Certainly, we've won the popular vote in many of the previous contests, but it doesn't mean that trend will continue.
Fair to say if Trump does win the popular vote, there's no way in hell Biden wins the Electoral College?
Pretty much. I think given this current setup, maybe in the past there would be scenarios where a Republican could win the popular vote, but a Democrat could eke out the Electoral College victory. I think that actually came close to happening in 2004, but at this point, probably not. I think if Trump wins the popular vote, it'll suggest maybe even a landslide in the Electoral College. Yeah,
in 2004, if I recall correctly, if Kerry had just won Ohio, which would have only been a swing of, I think the margin was 140,000, although I don't remember. Bush won by somewhere between 2 and 3 million votes in the popular vote, something like 62 million to 59 million. 140,000 votes going the other way in Ohio would have made Kerry president despite losing the popular vote.
Some people speculate that if that happened, that would have meant the end for the Electoral College in the United States, because then you would have had back-to-back elections where the
Right.
loser of the popular vote won the Electoral College, and it may have been seen as bipartisan because it screwed over a Republican and then a Democrat, right? Or a Democrat and then a Republican, rather.
Yeah.
So maybe that would have been the time in American history to call for the end to the Electoral College. But at this point, it's so clear that it benefits Republicans. I don't think we're going to see an end to it anytime soon.
Let's talk about everybody's favorite subject, indoor plumbing. The House yesterday passed a couple of bills that are aimed to block efficiency standards for elements of kitchens, specifically refrigerators and dishwashers. The refrigerator bill passed with 212 votes in favor. The dishwasher bill passed with 214 votes in favor. This is unlikely to be taken up by the Senate. This would almost certainly not be signed by President Joe Biden, even if it were to pass the Senate somehow. This is the same Trump nonsense stuff. You might remember that back in 2020, Trump was obsessed with plumbing. He would talk about having to flush the toilet 10 to 15 times, how there's a little trickle of water that quietly comes out when you go to shower. People can't wash dishes. It's all really, really crazy. You're not allowed to have windows. You're not allowed to have AC. You're not allowed to have heat. He really went very far with all of it. And it's just so funny because this like little pet obsession of Trump's has actually become something Republicans are trying to legislate around in the House of Representatives. It's just all it's if you weren't here to see it, you wouldn't believe that this stupid stuff is happening.
Yeah, it is absolutely insane to see where the Republican priorities are at this point. Clearly, they're just trying to put this out in the news so it becomes an election issue that Trump can run on, because
Yeah.
apparently he thinks that this is going to be super persuasive to voters. I have never heard of anyone complaining about dishwasher efficiency standards or refrigerator efficiency standards. I know the gas stove controversy has been a big thing over the past couple of years, and I
Yeah.
understand like some people who cook a lot prefer one to the other, and so I can understand people getting riled up about that. But are people really complaining about like the dishwasher not doing an efficient enough job, or the refrigerator not doing a good job at keeping the food cold? Like, is that
Yeah, I
actually
don't know. It's
happening?
like I have all of these energy efficient appliances and like I don't even have to do anything with my plates. I just run the dishwasher on a normal cycle and they come out clean. Like I never think about it. I'm not my fridge works absolutely fine. I have water pressure I'm perfectly pleased with. Like, do you deal, Pat, with a trickle of water that quietly comes out in the shower, or is your water
That
pressure fine?
that hasn't been the story for me. Everything's been totally fine. I know some of these standards have changed over the years. Like there are
Yeah.
these new toilets that only use a gallon of water when you flush them, for example. But I've never noticed like any issues with the change or anything like that. Certainly, I haven't noticed it with the dishwasher and the fridge or the shower. So maybe this is just an issue for Trump and basically no one else. But that's enough for House Republicans to back him and push measures in this direction.
Has anyone ever imposed on you a low flow shower head?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, me neither. No, I've
I
had
mean,
I've had
I've
autonomy over shower heads for a while now.
I've dealt with poor water pressure, especially if you're in like a big building, right? And you're on the top floor or something like that. And I do like good water pressure,
Yeah.
but for me, it's not something that I'm going to like complain about if I don't have, or certainly make a voting issue out of it.
And before we move off of the topic, any complaints as far as shampoos or conditioners that you want to get out today?
I think I'll save that for the bonus show.
Yeah.
I don't want to subject their members to that.
All right. So listen, the RNC is next week. Donald Trump did not invite Nikki Haley to the RNC, and yet she's still encouraging her delegates to back Donald Trump. I can't say I'm shocked, Pat, but any little inkling that maybe Nikki Haley was going to have some backbone and do anything other than kissing the ring and telling all of her delegates to support Trump and telling all of her voters to support Trump, it's just not happening. It's just not happening. Despite the fact that Trump is showing disunity by not inviting her, she said the event should be for Republican unity. Biden is unfit, and therefore all of my delegates should support Donald Trump. Do you see her as a pathetic figure, or do you see her as a unifying figure rising above partisanship to say, I don't care what Trump has to say about me personally, I'm sticking with we've all got to support the Republican nominee?
My sense is that this is self-serving. I think that if she thought it would be good for her career prospects to not release the delegates and to continue to oppose Trump, she would do that. But because the Republican Party is pretty much at the whim of Trump at this point, she has to play along, and this is part of playing along. And it's funny because Trump hasn't even invited her to the RNC, so she's doing this favor for him without getting anything in return. I'm certain she wants a future in politics. She's still relatively young. Maybe she wants to serve in his administration under some sort of role. I don't know if that's a possibility at this point,
I don't
but
either.
I think she doesn't want to brand herself as an anti-Trump Republican or a never-Trumper. She wants to continue having solid career prospects, and this is the way to do it.
Yeah, I tend to agree that it's all self-serving, but there's a bigger question, which is it really self-serving? Does she benefit from appearing so spineless? Does she come off as mature, or does she come off as spineless? And I'm kind of leaning towards the spineless conclusion on this one.
Well, I think a good thing to compare this to is Ted Cruz in 2016, because he spoke at the RNC and didn't endorse Trump. He basically told people to follow their hearts. And then there was this major backlash against him. It was one of those things that was maybe considered to be a career ender for him if he didn't reverse course. And what did he do? He did reverse course, and he endorsed Donald Trump. So if we have anything in history to compare this to, that would be the case. And maybe Nikki Haley doesn't want to go down that path.
I'm very curious to see what level of unity or disunity is apparent at the RNC. We still are waiting for the scheduling from the RNC. I think and assume, because it's always this way, that Trump will speak on Thursday when he formally accepts the nomination. But I don't know what time. I don't know what's happening on any other days. I checked again today. So I'm curious about the RNC and also have no idea what's happening and when.
Yep, I keep trying to find the schedule myself. All I've found out so far is that Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis will not be speaking at the RNC, but fear not, because Jim Justice of West Virginia will be delivering a speech. That we know for sure, and I'm sure that'll be incredibly exciting to everyone.
Yeah, that's going to be an absolutely electrifying speech, I can assure you. Okay, we'll see everybody tomorrow. New show, new bonus show.